I knew I was different the day I red penned my own marriage certificate for inconsistent date formatting. That's not a metaphor. I literally circled the May 12 in one section and 12 May in another, handed it back to the efficient, and waited. My ex-husband used to say I'd make a great court stenographer if I ever learned to smile. Joke's on him, I don't miss smiling. I miss clarity. I miss the sound of a clean paper stack, the smell of toner, the click of a timestamp. So yeah, I document everything. If you sneezed near me in 2017 and said I'm not sick, there's a line item in my files labeled Coughgate. At Marston Consulting, I was known as the scribe. Not officially, of course. My title was Senior Documentation Officer, but you know how offices work. If you're good at something nobody understands, they turn you into a punchline. So I was the novelist, grammar dominatrix, or my personal favorite, Linda the Log Lady, like some librarian extra from a bad sitcom. They laughed, sure. But they stopped laughing every time a client screamed about scope changes, and I calmly wheeled in a cart of binders, color-coded, signed, and dated, each one a quiet bullet dodged. People think documentation is boring until $1 million contract depends on whether someone said Q3 or by end of summer. I knew the weight of my work. Every Thursday, I sat in on the calls nobody else wanted, the ones with slippery clients and vague promises, and I typed like a courtroom clerk in a thunderstorm. Every will consider that got marked with a follow-up tag. Every tentatively approved got its own timestamp footnote. I didn't just take notes. I built timelines. I constructed narratives so precise, you could reconstruct a fiscal quarter from my Excel files alone. Look, I know it sounds obsessive. Hell, maybe it was, but obsessiveness is just another word for being right before anyone knows it. And trust me, being right is exhausting. People don't appreciate it until disaster knocks. Then suddenly they're asking if I happen to have a record of that one meeting from April with the German vendor and the handshake approval. I do. I always do. Quick pause. If you're the kind of person who loves seeing smug people get their comeuppance, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button and throw us a like. Not because we crave internet clout, but because it genuinely fuels the team to keep digging up these wild office betrayals. And yes, this one gets worse. Way worse. Back to it by year 13 at Marston, I'd weathered 5 CEOs, 3 rebrands, and more strategic pivots than a drunk playing Twister. But through it all, my role stayed steady. I was the quiet constant. My desk was the one with the fireproof cabinet and the redundant backup drives. I didn't do improv, I did facts. My office was across from the glass fishbowl conference room where the big dogs barked during war rooms. I wasn't usually in there unless they needed a record of something messy. Then it was let's bring in Linda, followed by some executive sighing and muttering about bureaucratic overhead. Translation, I had receipts and they hated that. One time, client tried to walk back on a deliverable, claiming we'd never agreed to include data migration. I pulled out a timestamp summary with their project lead sounds good, let's proceed in bold, italic, and circled like a crime scene. Suddenly, we weren't eating the cost. I never got thanked. I didn't expect to. But I always noticed when someone started saying per Linda's notes like a magic spell to ward off lawsuits. But I also saw the way the culture started to shift. As younger hires rolled in, shiny, ambitious, allergic to punctuation, they started asking, do we really need meeting minutes for everything? I'd smile. Only if you like getting paid. But smiles don't stand a chance against people in $600 sneakers with TikTok attention spans. Then came the collaboration stack. Suddenly, everyone wanted to use Slack and Notion and async workflows, which is tech bro code for we don't like accountability. My version control spreadsheet had more structure than their entire team charter. I warned them gently at first. These tools are great, but we need a definitive source of truth. They nodded, but I could feel the eye rolls through the Wi-Fi. Still, I kept at it. Because I knew the moment the wrong person misremembered a date, the whole damn tower would lean. And they'd come running. They always did. Till the day Travis walked in. He walked in like he owned the oxygen, Travis McCall, freshly minted VP of Delivery, reeking of Bluetooth and overconfidence. The kind of guy who claps after his own PowerPoints and thinks turning bullets into emojis counts as innovation. His first week, he replaced the ergonomic chairs in the war room with bean bags, said it encouraged ideation flow. I said it encouraged lumbar lawsuits. He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. Travis was all flash and friction. Always on a call, always gesturing like he was defusing a bomb. He brought a ring light to meetings, a ring light for internal calls. Said it was brand hygiene. I asked if that meant I needed to iron my face too. That didn't land. Nothing I said ever really landed with Travis because I was what he called legacy process, corporate speak for woman who remembers when we had standards. He started poking at my work during his second all hands. We're gonna be leaner, faster, meaner, he barked, pacing like a Dollar Tree Tony Robbins. We're killing busy work. No more war and peace in our meeting notes, people chuckled. I didn't. He looked right at me and grinned, looking at you, Linda. I felt my stomach drop. Not because I was scared, because I knew exactly what kind of man he was. The kind who thought details were a speed bump on his shortcut to glory. The kind who mistakes recklessness for agility. And worst of all, the kind who never reads contracts, just signs them with whatever pen flatters his signature. The first real clash came during a vendor call. The client asked about a feature adjustment we'd verbally agreed to 6 weeks prior. Travis squinted like the idea was brand new. I calmly pulled up the timestamp summary, noted the client's confirmation, even flagged the JIRA ticket I'd created as a courtesy. Travis didn't thank me. He said, "Jesus, Linda, no wonder this project's dragging. You're documenting us to death." After the meeting, he cornered me by the kitchen and said, not every conversation needs a courtroom transcript. We're not writing a novel here. I wanted to say no, just trying to prevent a lawsuit, but I bit my tongue. My lip was bleeding by the time I got back to my desk. 2 weeks later, I was pulled into a meeting with HR and Travis, both grinning like hyenas in suits. "We're restructuring," Travis said too brightly, "making space for agile communicators." HR nodded like a bobblehead. "Your role is being sunset," she added like she was tucking it in with a lullaby. I sat there, silent. There was no fight to be had. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was execution by buzzword. They were eliminating clarity because it didn't come with a GIF. Travis slid a paper across the table. "Severance. Modest. Titled Exit Communication Plan." I read it twice just to be petty. He leaned back, smug. "I'm sure you'll find something that suits your meticulous style." I stood, shook their hands, and said nothing. Walked back to my desk like a ghost. Colleagues pretended not to notice. Someone muttered "I'm sorry" like they were passing a stranger's funeral. I packed my things in silence. A mug, a pair of blue light glasses, one aloe plant that looked like it had given up hope back in 2019. But before I shut down my machine, I took one last tour of the server. Per policy, buried deep in the employee handbook, page 93, section 14C, I was allowed to retain authored work, provided it contained no client confidentials and was for personal reference only. My logs, my formatting templates, my cross-referenced approvals, they were mine, so I encrypted them, compressed, dated, password protected. Moved them to a drive labeled household recipes. Let them fire the novelist. I was taking the manuscript. As I walked out the door, Travis called after me, "No hard feelings, right?" I didn't even turn around, just said, "None at all. Just wait until you need chapter 2. The box they gave me wasn't even cardboard. It was one of those flimsy plastic bins with cracked handles and somebody's leftover post-it stuck to the side that said Janet's Tupperware. In purple gel pen. Fitting, really. You give a woman 13 years of version tracking, flawless audits, and bulletproof scopes, and her send-off is a tub meant for someone's chili. I stacked my things carefully: monitor riser, wrist pad, my backup glasses. The I eat scope creep for breakfast mug a junior had given me in 2016. I left the aloe plant. It had suffered enough. My badge still worked on the elevator but not on the office door. Security had already deactivated my keycard by the time I made it to the lobby. Travis's efficiency had one setting: cruel. I called IT and the guy, Josh, maybe Jason, sounded sheepish. "Sorry, Linda, just following instructions." He paused. "We, already disabled your drives. Remote wipe is in progress." I smiled, more for me than him. "That's all right, I'm already backed up." I didn't mean emotionally. See, I knew this was coming. Not that it would be Travis specifically. Life rarely gives you that much warning, but I'd been feeling the tide shift for months. New management. Buzzwords without meaning. Requests for lighter notes and smarter documentation that somehow always meant less traceable. It all smelled like impending stupidity, and stupidity tends to get rid of the people who remember things. So I'd prepared. Deep in the bowels of the company's policy archive, last updated 7 years ago and forgotten like a dead MySpace page, was a clause buried under document retention. Subsection F.14. Employees may retain personal copies of internally authored work, provided no client confidentials are present and all copies are anonymized for training or reference purposes. It was written back when we used SharePoint and wore lanyards with actual keys. Guess who wrote that clause? I didn't just know the rules. I'd helped write the damn manual. Over the past year, I'd slowly, methodically exported my authored documentation, every project log, scope change approval, retro summary, stakeholder matrix. I'd scrubbed all client names, replaced them with initials, tagged internal teams generically, dev lead, client PM, and encrypted the entire archive into a clean, timestamp package. I labeled the file set Linda's Cookbook V12 and dropped it onto an external drive shaped like a gummy bear. It now sat quietly at the bottom of my purse, zipped up between a chapstick and a pack of wintergreen gum. Nothing illegal. Nothing violating confidentiality. Just history. The kind of history men like Travis never bother reading until the consequences arrive with a law degree and a clipboard. That night, I poured a glass of wine, pulled up the archive on my home laptop, and skimmed through the logs. So clean, so crisp, hundreds of hours spent turning chaos into chronology. I found the last entry from the project Travis had hijacked, the one tied to our biggest client, Government Tech Consortium, with a clause so precise it practically glowed. Clause 12.3b, final payment of milestone funds contingent upon verifiable documentation of project changes. signed by a designated documentation officer. The officer was me. The signature was mine. Every edit, every meeting, every decision accounted for. Travis had wiped the active folders and probably thought he'd buried me with it, but he hadn't touched the clause. He hadn't touched me. I shut the laptop, feeling the kind of peace only a librarian gets when she knows the overdue fees are about to come due. Let them delete, let them rebrand. Let Travis paste his little emoji bullet points and hope no one notices the holes. I wasn't angry anymore. That had passed the moment the keycard failed. What I felt now was colder, sharper, like standing on the shore after a storm, watching the tide pull back and reveal the bones. He thought he'd eliminated me. He hadn't realized I'd archived the entire battlefield. The first week after I left, the silence was deafening in the best possible way. No pings, no calendar invites for alignment huddles, no sudden 4:59 p.m., quick questions that required a 3-day paper trail. I was just gone, a ghost to the machine I used to oil with timestamps and bullet points. I slept in. I walked to the bakery on Tuesdays. I read a novel, a real one with unreliable narrators and no hyperlinks. By week 2, I started freelancing. Small stuff, document formatting for nonprofit, reworking user guides for a startup with more ambition than syntax. Nothing glorious, but it kept my hands busy and my mind clear. I even bought a new notebook, one of those bougie ones with thick paper and a ribbon bookmark, thinking maybe I'd finally write something for myself. I filled 5 pages before instinct took over and I started outlining a QA checklist instead. Muscle memory's a hell of a drug. I kept an eye on Marston, though, not obsessively. Just a tap of the LinkedIn feed here, a glance at their Glassdoor every other Friday, like checking in on an ex you're 97% over but still hope tripped on a Roomba. The official tone was all buzzwords and baked-in optimism, lean delivery transformation, accelerated pivot pathways. I knew what that meant. Travis was pulling duct tape over open contracts and praying no one noticed the leaks. But then, around week 4, something shifted. A former coworker, Beth from Ops, texted me late at night. "You hear anything about the milestone check?" I hadn't. "The client hasn't paid." That got my attention. I didn't respond right away. Just stared at the screen, letting that sentence sit like a puzzle piece with blood on it. Our largest client, a defense-adjacent tech conglomerate, had a milestone clause baked into their master services agreement that was tighter than a frog's ass. $5 million, tied directly to project delivery and more specifically to documentation signed by a certified officer. The certified officer had been me. I poured a whiskey, neat, and pulled up my archive. Everything was there. Meeting logs from kickoff to delivery. Timestamp scope revisions. Screenshots of approvals. My signature digitally embedded and backed by metadata. I'd done it all by the book because the book was half written in my voice. 2 more days passed, then came the LinkedIn message. It was short, simple, no greeting. Just a name I recognized immediately: Morgan Yates, Compliance Officer, Stratcom Client Division. "Do you still have your logs?" I stared at it for a full minute. Not because I didn't know the answer. I did, I had them. They were backed up in 3 locations and printed in 2. What caught me off guard wasn't the question. It was the subtext. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was a red flare in a quiet sky. I typed back, "Why do you ask?" The dots danced, then stopped, then danced again. She didn't answer, not yet, but she didn't have to. I opened the project binder again, flipping through the anonymized notes. All of it, the decision to swap vendors midstream. The last-minute architecture change Travis had greenlit verbally with no follow-up. The retro meeting where concerns were logged but never addressed. And then, the signature block. Mine, verified, traceable. The contract had never been updated. My name was still on it. Travis, I realized, must have assumed the final milestone would get rubber-stamped like all the others. He didn't know the client had built a landmine into the fine print. Clause that required airtight documentation, and not just any documentation. Mine. That kind of clause doesn't just disappear. I closed the binder, pushed my laptop aside, and leaned back in my chair. My office now was a spare bedroom with bad lighting and a crooked shelf, but suddenly it felt like the center of gravity. I could practically feel the tension humming down the corporate pipeline, reaching out like a tremor toward the one person they thought they didn't need. I hadn't called, but someone had knocked, and I had the key. The email arrived on a Wednesday, 9:42 a.m., sandwiched between a Canva invoice and a spam pitch for ergonomic toe separators. Subject line: request for documentation, review Stratcom milestone contract. It had the kind of tone lawyers master, clinical but freighted, like a knife wrapped in a linen napkin. It was from a legal associate at Hartwell and Gentry, Stratcom's external counsel. Polite, precise, and not asking so much as inviting me to consider assisting in a retrospective documentation analysis pursuant to MSA Clause 12.3b. They didn't mention Travis. They didn't have to. The wording said everything. "We are requesting your expertise to verify the timeline, decisions, and approvals associated with Project Falco's Q3 deliverable, as initially certified under your tenure at Marston Consulting." My first reaction was disbelief. Not that they needed help, but that they were willing to ask. Clients don't usually poke their heads into the vendor's personnel drama. They don't care who got fired, only that the pipeline runs on time. For them to reach out directly, past the account manager, past the project lead, all the way to a terminated documentation officer, that meant the wheels had not just fallen off. They'd caught fire and rolled into traffic. I read the email twice, then a third time. There it was, clause 12.3b explicitly cited, milestone funds contingent upon delivery of complete project documentation, signed and maintained by the assigned documentation officer throughout the life cycle of the engagement. Assigned, maintained, throughout. Travis must have thought he could just skim the surface. Use Teams chat threads and call recordings like a digital paper trail. But Teams wasn't a system of record. It was a whiteboard in a wind tunnel. Half the meeting notes were unfiled, the rest buried under 6 different channels named Urgent Review V2 Final. No cross-references, no summary indexes, no signatures, and now the client was calling the bluff. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. Let the weight of the ask settle, because this wasn't a favor. This was a lifeline being extended across a chasm Travis had personally jackhammered, and I knew exactly what it meant. If Stratcom's lawyers were involved, the payment was already frozen. $5 million of deliverables were being held hostage by a clause no one had respected until it snapped its jaws shut. I opened my archive, searched Falco Q3. Up came the chain: change requests, risk logs, escalation protocols, vendor approvals. Every meeting with the Stratcom product team, every late-night architecture pivot, every scope trade-off, all backed up, all dated, all tied to my signature. What Travis had wiped, I had preserved. What he had ignored, I had documented. But I didn't hit reply, not yet. Instead, I drafted a short note. Not to Stratcom, to a friend of mine, contracts lawyer I'd worked with back when Marston still valued compliance over charisma. I asked if she'd review a potential engagement on my behalf, just in case. Then I went to make tea, Ruibos. Calming, grounded. Something about holding that chipped mug made me feel less like the woman who'd been discarded, more like the one who held the trigger finger on a $5 million detonation switch. Later that afternoon, another message came. This one from Morgan Yates, the Stratcom compliance officer who'd messaged me before. Short, direct. We've reviewed the current documentation. It does not meet the terms outlined in the MSA. Internal sign-offs were incomplete or missing. Legal is recommending independent validation. I pushed for you. Please consider it. I stared at the screen, then leaned back in my chair. She pushed for me. There's a certain kind of satisfaction in being remembered not for being nice or social or culturally aligned, but for being right. Not flashy right. Quietly, methodically, painfully right. The kind of right that survives reorganizations, firings, even Travis's smug attempts at erasure. I tapped out a reply. I'm open to discussing it. My counsel will reach out. Then I hit send, closed my laptop, and watched the steam curl from my tea. Let the game begin. The boardroom looked different than it used to. Same long walnut table, same flickering recessed lights, but the energy was off. Edgy, desperate. A quiet hum of denial clung to the air, like the kind you feel right before a storm hits, but everyone insists the clouds are decorative. Travis was already seated when Stratcom's legal rep arrived. Jessica Lorne, mid-40s, low bun. The kind of calm you only earn from watching enough people implode in front of you that it no longer surprises you. She walked in without a handshake, without a smile, just a slim black portfolio and a notepad that looked like it had already been weaponized. Behind her, a junior associate wheeled in a small cart of binders. Travis stood up, arms wide like they were old friends. Jessica, glad you could make it. We've got everything prepped for you, project logs, status updates, Jira threads, and our team's archive. It's all digital now, way more efficient. Jessica didn't sit, didn't blink. She simply opened her portfolio and laid a printed sheet of paper on the table like it was a poker hand that couldn't lose. Clause 12.3b, she said. Per your MSA with Stratcom, detailed meeting records shall be maintained and signed off by a designated documentation officer throughout the life cycle of the engagement. She looked at Travis. Where are those logs? The room went silent, not the nervous kind. This was something colder. Factual, like watching a surgeon wait for vitals that never beeped. Travis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, we've got meeting notes from teams, and the PMs kept pretty detailed agendas in Confluence. We use real-time collaboration now. There's no single documentation officer, per se. It's more fluid. Agile. Jessica tapped the paper. Once, clause 12.3b doesn't mention fluid. It specifies maintenance and sign-off by a designated documentation officer. I'm assuming you reassigned that role. Travis shifted. We streamlined. The documentation officer role was sunset in Q2. We transitioned to team-based. She interrupted without raising her voice. So no official sign-off for the last 2 quarters? He tried to speak. Failed. Tried again, we assumed. Jessica turned the paper around and slid it toward him. At the bottom, in 11-point Arial, sat a name. Linda Keene, designated documentation officer. Active through Q3. Jessica leaned in slightly. Did Miss Keene sign off on any of the submitted documentation? Travis opened his mouth, closed it, and looked toward the junior PM seated to his left, probably hoping for a lifeline. The kid was already sweating through his collar. I think we used some of her old templates." Jessica didn't look at him. She looked at Travis. "I'm not asking about templates. I'm asking about logs. Signed, maintained, verified. Because what we received," she said, producing another sheet, "was a series of bullet points, half of which are timestamped by anonymous contributors in a rotating Teams chat labeled DocDump Final V3. No approvals, no context, no version control." The CFO cleared his throat like he was about to say something conciliatory. She didn't look at him either. Clause 12.3b is a legal contingency clause, she continued, designed to ensure accountability in environments where contractual drift is common. You agreed to it. Your firm received payment under it. And now you've submitted logs that, frankly, look like someone's high school group project Slack chat. Travis flushed. "Look, I don't know what Linda told you, but she wasn't aligned with our new delivery model. Her notes were excessive. No one wanted to read." Jessica raised one eyebrow, the kind of micro-expression that could collapse empires. "No one wanted to read the logs that are now required to release $5 million? Silence again. This time, not even the air conditioner dared to hum. From across the table, the junior associate opened one of the binders and produced a copy of the original SOW, Statement of Work. Jessica slid it next to the MSA. "This one too," she said softly. "Every project phase references the same clause. Every milestone payment is conditional." Travis looked like he might throw up. Jessica finally sat down, folded her hands. "I'm going to give you two options," she said. "You can produce signed, verified documentation maintained by the designated officer." Or, she paused, glancing at her associate, "We begin procedures for breach of contract and initiate stop work proceedings." Travis opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And then, almost mercifully, the associate added, "We've already contacted Miss Keene." The CFO's head snapped toward Travis. "You what?" Jessica folded the MSA and placed it back in her portfolio. She responded through counsel. "We're in discussions now." Travis tried to speak, choked on it, looked around the room like someone might bail him out. No one moved. The walls felt thinner. The lights a little hotter. He hadn't just lost control. He'd never had it. And now everyone knew. My lawyer, Renee, velvet-voiced and spine made of titanium, called me at 8:03 the next morning with one sentence. "They accepted your conditions without hesitation." She didn't need to say who they were. Stratcom, the client. The same conglomerate that had once needed 5 layers of approvals to order printer ink now cleared a 5-figure consulting rate in under 12 hours. And the conditions? Simple. 1. I work as an external documentation auditor under my LLC, Keen Traceability Services, freshly minted the night before on LegalZoom. 2. All communications go through Renee. I don't talk to Travis. I don't hear from Travis. If his name shows up in my inbox, the rate triples. Renee laughed when I added that last part. I wasn't joking. They sent over the project brief within the hour. Stratcom wanted immediate validation of all documented changes, approvals, and milestones pertaining to Project Falco's Q3 deliverable. The deliverable that now had $5 million hanging over its head like a slow, swinging axe. I didn't rush. I reviewed everything like I always did, methodically, with one hand on my keyboard and the other on my T. The same binder I'd built, the one I'd encrypted and hidden behind layers of digital obfuscation, opened with the kind of clean structure you only get from someone who genuinely gives a damn. Meeting logs, 100% accounted for. Change requests, tracked, signed, time-stamped. Approvals, dual-signed by stakeholders, including Stratcom's own PM. Versions, indexed, version-controlled, cross-referenced. Even the tiny things were there. A recorded note that the deployment date had shifted by 2 days due to a vendor outage, flagged and annotated. An email summary sent to confirm a conversation Travis had brushed off as verbal alignment. All there, and all under my name. I composed a report, 10 pages, sober, precise. No flourishes, no smugness, just the facts like always. Renee sent it through with an invoice attached. First half up front, the other half upon Stratcom's internal confirmation that the logs met MSA standards. They wired the full amount within 3 hours. No questions, no revisions, just silence like the collective breath of a legal department being released all at once. Later that evening, as the sky turned that tired gray-pink color above my apartment, I got a message from Morgan Yates. "Your work saved the contract. Just so you know, I didn't respond right away. Just stared at it. Then typed back, 'Thanks, tell your team to keep an eye on who gets called excessive.'" She replied with a single emoji, the file folder. We understood each other. I didn't gloat. There was no victory lap, no champagne, just a quiet satisfaction. A flick of the switch that turned my printer on as I labeled the invoice folder Falco recovered. And when my payment cleared, I did the most indulgent thing I could think of. I bought a new chair. One with lumbar support and memory foam. Because if I was going to be the person companies called when their arrogance collided with their contracts, I might as well be comfortable doing it. I didn't need revenge. I needed a retainer. And now I had both. From the 5th floor of the cafe across the street, an overpriced place with reclaimed wood tables and lavender syrup in everything. I had a perfect view of Marston's front doors. It was all glass, all angles, designed for optics over function. You could see everyone coming and going. No secrets, not even in silhouette. That Friday morning, I took my seat with a latte that cost more than lunch used to and watched the first signs of unraveling. The legal assistant, Kelsey, always in gray cardigans and fear in her eyes, rushed out the revolving door clutching a folder the size of a toddler. 10 minutes later, the CFO walked in, jaw clenched like he was chewing gravel. Not long after, HR's lead walked out looking like she'd aged 6 years overnight. No one smiled. No one lingered in the lobby for small talk. It was triage mode. I didn't need a memo to know what was happening. I had the receipts. That morning, a friend from accounting, who'd quietly slipped me a Starbucks gift card on my last day, forwarded a Slack export file she accidentally came across during a server permissions review. It had been flagged by IT when someone searched the word audit. One line stood out, sitting there like a rotten tooth in a glass of water. Travis McCall # Delivery Insights docs are for boomers. No one reads that crap anyway. We just need bullets and a deck. Nobody audits logs unless something explodes. Well, something had. Stratcom's legal team had looped in their internal compliance division, and per their own escalation procedure, Marston was now required to undergo a risk audit. That meant every document, every staff change, every milestone was being reevaluated through a lens Travis never knew existed. Consequence. That same friend from accounting texted me mid-morning. CFO is demanding a full audit on every role Travis sunset. Starting with you. Another message followed an hour later. HR had to pull the old retention policy. Apparently no one told them you wrote it, and then he tried to call you from his personal number. I glanced at my phone. He had, 3 times, blocked of course. I didn't even let the ringtone finish. I just hit silence and went back to my scone. By 3 p.m., the leaks started. A junior delivery manager, fresh out of grad school and furious about being publicly blamed for documentation failures, shared screenshots in a private Discord. They hit Twitter an hour later. Not viral, but enough for the tech blogs to sniff around. VP said docs are for boomers before $5M client freeze. Leaked Slack logs show that was the headline by sundown. Accompanied by the emoji-laced bullet list Travis had once insisted was the new standard of communication. Internal chaos turned outward. The CEO, who hadn't been seen on campus in weeks, was photographed storming into the building that night with a duffel bag. Someone captioned it, "When your startup starts downing." I watched the building glow with after-hours lights. Legal working late, HR in war rooms. The CFO apparently called an emergency compliance workshop, mandatory attendance, which made 3 people quit outright. And me? I took a picture of the building. Just one, framed with my coffee in the corner out of focus, just enough to say, I was here. I saw. No gloating, no announcements, just peace. The kind that settles in when you know they finally understand the cost of underestimating a woman with a time-stamped archive and zero tolerance for being erased. Let Travis fall. I didn't have to push. I'd already built the documentation that tripped him. They didn't even try to pretend it was a routine meeting. No catered lunch, no branded water bottles, no overeager intern fussing with HDMI cables. Just a room full of suits, 1 cold pot of coffee, and tension sharp enough to sand drywall. Stratcom's legal counsel, Jessica Lorne, was already seated at the far end of the table when I walked in. She nodded, then subtly gestured to the seat beside her. I took it without a word. No introductions were needed. Everyone in the room already knew who I was, either because I used to quietly save their necks, or because they were now using those same necks to breathe fire in closed-door calls about missed milestones and pending litigation. Across the table, Travis looked like a man who had practiced a dozen responses in the mirror and now couldn't remember a single one. His shirt collar was wilted. No ring light, no bravado, just sweat where his confidence used to be. Jessica opened her folder with calm precision and laid down a copy of the MSA, Clause 12.3b highlighted in yellow. Per your agreement, she began, her tone made of surgical steel, Ms. Keene has completed an independent verification of Project Falco's Q3 documentation. She didn't raise her voice, didn't look at anyone in particular. Her records matched all required deliverables. We consider the milestone validated. It was a breath of relief from someone, CFO maybe, not Travis. He was too busy trying to figure out how to make himself disappear. Jessica continued, flipping to a new page. However, given the lapse in your internal compliance protocols and the failure to maintain proper documentation per the designated role outlined in this agreement, Stratcom has elected to pursue continued oversight through a separate engagement. She turned slightly toward me. Ms. Keene has accepted our retainer offer. She will now operate independently as our exclusive documentation consultant, direct reporting to Stratcom compliance. Silence, not a ripple, not a whisper. Then the CEO, balding expression locked somewhere between constipation and regret, cleared his throat. We'll resume payment then? Jessica nodded. Yes, effective immediately, under the new contract. There it was, the quietest transfer of power imaginable. I wasn't back at Marston. I'd transcended it. Travis shifted in his chair like he might speak. Then Legal leaned in from his side, whispered something. Probably the corporate version of shut your damn mouth and take your lumps. He slouched back, defeated. HR slid a folder across the table to him. Thin, no words, just a nod. Travis didn't argue. He just took it, stood up, and walked out. No handshake, no parting shot. Just a man exiting a story he never bothered to understand until the last chapter crushed him. Jessica stood. Thank you, everyone. We'll forward documentation of this transition by end of day. And that was it. As we left the building, the air felt heavier behind me. People avoiding eye contact. Executive assistants typing like their lives depended on it. The smell of antiseptic panic in the elevator lobby. Outside, Jessica turned to me. They underestimated you. I gave a small shrug. They usually do. She smiled faintly. That's why we hired you. Later that evening, I got an email official onboarding from Stratcom. NDA access credentials, a welcome note from their chief compliance officer that ended with, we believe documentation is the backbone of accountability. Thank you for restoring ours. I filed it away in a fresh folder. Then I opened a new log. Client, Stratcom project, oversight transition start date, effective immediately notes, retained, not returning. Just watching the rebuild from a higher floor. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. I just documented them into a corner. And I'll keep doing it quietly, cleanly, until the people who laughed at my logs start reading them like scripture. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.